The harbor authority ensures that the pilot boats in their service meet the relevant requirements. Where reasonably practicable, arrangements should be made for the mooring ropes of pilot boats to remain at the berth when the boat is at sea. Any additional ropes, not left ashore, should be properly stowed in a safe location. The decks of the pilot boat should be clear of all unnecessary obstructions, allowing clear passage and movement for the pilot and crew. Where deck lighting is fitted, it should be tested in accordance with the harbor authority's procedures. Charted pilot boarding locations provide general guidance for arriving vessels and may be varied as required in order to provide the safest place for a pilot transfer in the prevailing conditions. Harbor authorities have a responsibility to identify and evaluate areas for the safe boarding and landing of pilots. The following should include, but not be limited to, sea room for the maneuver, the depth of water, shelter, seabed gradient, traffic and communication, and proximity of traffic and potential wash. The traffic in the vicinity and risks associated with interaction with these vessels should be considered. Harbor authorities should establish reporting procedures, whereby VHF radio contact is established between the pilot boat and ship, on the specified channel published in the sailing directions. The coxswain of the pilot boat should establish the position of the ship to be served, and where there is more than one ship in the vicinity, should establish the relative positions and expected movement of all vessels in the area. The coxswain of the pilot boat should advise the onshore monitoring site as to the intended boarding or landing plan when on station. The coxswain should tell the ship which side to rig the pilot ladder and the height above the water, and check that the type of ladder provided is appropriate to the freeboard of the ship. Before a pilot transfer operation and after consultation with the pilot involved, the pilot boat coxswain, or VTS, should advise the ship to be served. The coxswain of the pilot boat should tell the ship the recommended course and speed to provide an appropriate lee. Particular care and attention should be paid in recommending a course and speed that avoids the pilot boat boarding in following sea and swell, with the potential to broach. When there is more than one ship to be served, the coxswain advises each ship of their sequence number. When transferring more than one pilot, the total number is to be communicated between the ship and the pilot boat. And any additional requirements, such as heaving lines or removal of man ropes. Masters should be asked to confirm that the pilot ladder is rigged in accordance with current IMO regulations. The pilot boat deckhand should visually inspect the condition of the ship's boarding arrangements, including, if it is safe to do so, placing weight onto the bottom of the ladder, while being hooked on. For ships with a freeboard of more than 9 meters, when no side door is available, a combination arrangement is required. The pilot should ascertain that the embarkation area on the ship is free from obstructions. The coxswain should establish this when speaking to the vessel. This should apply even if a ladder is not required. On approaching a ship from a near head-on position on the same side as the pilot ladder is rigged, care must be taken to ensure the wash created by the pilot boat does not interfere with the safe boarding or landing operation. This may require the pilot boat to remain clear of the pilot ladder until the wash created has cleared down the ship's side. Consideration should be given to passing down the opposite side and approaching the ladder from aft, in order to minimize the effect of the pilot boat's own wash on the transfer operation. Particular caution should be taken when serving a ship at anchor, which is unable to maneuver to make a lee, particularly at slack water. The ship may need to be underway and making sufficient way so that the pilot boat can maintain position alongside the vessel before a pilot transfer operation. During the approach to the ship, both the pilot and the deckhand should remain in the wheelhouse of the pilot boat until it is settled at reduced speed, in the lee of the vessel. At night, the pilot boat deck should be illuminated before anyone goes on deck. At night, during the final approach, the pilot boat searchlight should be turned on to assess the sea conditions, illuminate the pilot ladder and the foredeck of the pilot boat. Care must be taken not to dazzle personnel on deck, or adversely affect the night vision of persons on the bridge, or on the deck of the ship to be served. The decision to place the pilot boat alongside the vessel to be served should ultimately be the responsibility of the coxswain. The coxswain should take into consideration factors including but not limited to adverse weather conditions, traffic density, any vessel obstructions or side overhangs, or wash when assessing the risk to personnel and/or the launch by coming alongside. If there is any doubt, at any time, about the condition or compliance of the ladder arrangement in accordance with SLAS requirements or safety of the transfer operation, the pilot should not board or land. All non-compliant or unsafe ladders and boarding arrangements and any near-miss incident associated with the transfer operation must be reported to the Harbor Authority as soon as it is safe to do so. Whilst undertaking the transfer operation, the pilot boat's radar should be placed in standby mode, unless due to the prevailing conditions it would impact the navigational and situational awareness. During restricted visibility, it is recommended that whenever possible, a ship to be served is approached around its stern and not across the bow. Harbor authorities should ensure that coxswains are fully familiar with the requirements of the collision regulations governing navigation in restricted visibility. The decision to put a pilot boat alongside a ship is the responsibility of the pilot boat coxswain. In all cases, the decision to board the ship is the responsibility of the pilot involved. In making the decision, the pilot should take into consideration factors including but not limited to the environmental conditions, the physical capabilities of the pilot, the suitability of the boarding arrangements, and the conduct and condition of the vessel. When on deck, both the deckhand and the pilot must wear appropriate PPE as required and approved by the Harbor Authority and worn in accordance with manufacturer's instructions. It is strongly recommended that whilst on deck, the deckhand is secured to the pilot boat by an approved method that does not restrict their freedom of movement. This should also be made available to the pilot. Provided that the ladder has been rigged at the correct height, the deckhand should proceed forward, using the safest route, normally the outboard side. Some harbor authorities have a practice of requiring the lower steps of the ladder to be brought on board the pilot boat to avoid the risk of the ladder becoming strained should the boat pin it to the ship's side. This practice is not without risk and is not practiced universally. Harbor authorities should undertake their own risk assessments and decide upon their own control measures to deal with this risk. In considering the safest route from cabin to the ladder, the following should be taken into account: the width of the deck, the location and usability of the safety rail. If the inboard route is taken, what is the likelihood of the boat rolling against the side of the ship, restricting the area between the deckhouse of the pilot boat and the flat of the ship's side? The safest route is to use the outboard side of the pilot boat, unless specific port risk assessments can safely mitigate the inboard route due to vessel design, the exposure to the elements especially when a good lee is not possible, or there is passing traffic if the outside route is used, the heel of the pilot boat during transfer, and the ability of the coxswain to view the transfer operation. When a retrieval line is considered necessary to ensure the safe rigging of a pilot ladder, the line should be fastened at or above the last spreader step and should lead forward. The retrieval line should not hinder the pilot nor obstruct the safe approach of the pilot boat. Where the ladder's height needs adjusting, the coxswain should inform the ship. The pilot and deckhand should be recalled to the wheelhouse whilst the ladder is being adjusted. The transfer should not be resumed until receiving confirmation the ladder is secure at the correct height. In adverse weather conditions, the risk associated with boarding operations are heightened. Neither the pilot nor the deckhand should proceed from the cabin until the pilot boat is in the lee of the ship, and the decision to proceed with the transfer has been made by the coxswain. Before stepping on the ladder, the pilot should establish that it is properly secured, by communication with the officer at the top of the ladder. If the top of the pilot ladder is unattended, the pilot should not attempt to embark. The timing of stepping from the pilot boat to the ladder requires the use of proven techniques, for example, using the top of the wave to step onto the ladder, and the roll of the ship to aid the ascent. If conditions are such that in the opinion of the pilot, a safe transfer cannot be made, then the attempt should be abandoned. A clear decision, as to whether the pilot boat should remain alongside or not during the transfer, should be made between pilot and coxswain prior to the pilot leaving the cabin. taking into account the height of the climb, the pilot ladder arrangement, and the prevailing environmental conditions. If, under these circumstances, the pilot boat leaves the ship's side, particular care must be made not to foul the ladder. When the pilot has a reasonably short climb, it may be appropriate for the pilot boat to remain alongside until the climb is completed, to ensure the pilot boat does not foul the ladder when leaving the ship's side. Nothing should be worn over PPE that might interfere with its normal operation at any time. If the pilot has a bag, a heaving line should be used to lift it onto the ship, after the pilot is clear of the ladder. The ship should be informed in advance. The use of man ropes to assist the pilot is the personal choice of the pilot involved and should be provided or removed as required. This information should be passed to the ship at the earliest opportunity, to allow time for rigging or removal. When the ship to be served has a freeboard near to, or less than, that of the pilot boat, particular caution should be taken as these transfers can be amongst the most hazardous. In these circumstances, there may be insufficient parallel body for the pilot boat to work against. Such situations can be worsened further if both the ship and the pilot boat are rolling or pitching. The potential for damage to the pilot boat or injury to pilot and deck crew is increased. There is also an added possibility that the pilot boat may become hung up on the ship's side. Before the transfer takes place, the coxswain and pilot must be satisfied that the pilot boat is sufficiently stable alongside the ship for the transfer operation to be safely completed. The pilot should not stand outside the rail of the ship waiting for an opportunity to transfer. A side gate entrance should only be used if the gap between the stanchions is 700 to 800 mm, in accordance with SLS regulations. When making the decision to transfer, the pilot should give consideration to factors including, but not limited to, the availability of suitable handholds or stanchions at deck level, the time taken to effect the transfer, particularly in adverse weather, the deck condition, including if the deck is awash, vessel fendering, interaction between the pilot boat and the ship, and the physical capability of the pilot. As with embarkation, communication should be established between the ship and the pilot boat and the transfer arrangements confirmed in advance. The decision to disembark from a ship to the pilot boat rests entirely with the pilot involved. Before leaving the bridge, the pilot should inform the master of the anticipated movements of any surrounding ships, the VHF channels to monitor and the reporting points, the heading and speed required for the pilot transfer, the presence of navigational dangers, tidal height and flow, any advice on the passage plan to be used after the pilot transfer, the anticipated helm or engine movements required to facilitate transfer, the VHF channels for communication with the pilot boat, and any adjustments to the pilot ladder required by the pilot launch. On arrival at the pilot ladder area, the pilot should check the condition and security of the pilot ladder, both visually and from the officer on station. Any non-compliance or potentially unsafe arrangement should be reported to the harbor authority immediately, and the ladder must not be used until the non-compliance is rectified. The pilot should check their PPE is correctly donned. Any bag should be lowered to the pilot boat by heaving line, once the pilot is clear of the ladder and on the deck of the pilot boat. The pilot boat deckhand should be at the bottom of the ladder to ensure that the ladder is rigged at the correct height and clear. Before stepping onto the ladder, the pilot should check that the pilot boat is lying alongside and has not fouled the pilot ladder. During the descent, the deckhand should advise the pilot how many steps to go to the deck of the pilot boat. As the pilot is stepping from the ladder, the deckhand is to be on hand to provide a timely warning of danger and to give physical assistance to the pilot, if required. In adverse weather, the stepping off point may not be the lowest step, therefore clear communication between the deckhand and pilot is essential. It is strongly recommended that whilst on deck, the deckhand is secured to the pilot boat by an approved method which does not restrict their freedom of movement. It is recommended that the pilot makes his way to the cabin, followed by the deckhand. The deckhand may be required to receive the pilot's bag or equipment. The return to the cabin should be made by the safest route. Once clear of the ladder, the deckhand should check the decks are clear and safe, before proceeding back to the cabin. The coxswain should not leave the lee of the ship until all personnel are safely in the cabin. Once clear of the ship, the coxswain should call the ship on VHF and inform them that the pilot boat is clear and that the ship can resume its passage.